And if you can tolerate some, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
If you can tolerate some philosophy, I was going to talk a little bit about the relationship between Krishna consciousness, believing in Krishna, knowing Krishna, and reason, human reason, logic, science, and all those things. And so the first point I wanted to make is that there are certain rules of the game that apply to everyone, no matter what your philosophy is. If you're Krishna conscious or you're an atheist or whatever you are, there are just certain rules of the game. It's like in baseball or football or soccer. It doesn't matter what team you're on, it's the same rules. And so basically, the rules are, Aristotle pointed this out in various ways, that in order to develop a system of thought, in order to try to demonstrate to anyone any kind of knowledge, certain things have to be present. For example, well, I'll begin with an analogy from mathematics, and then I'll go to science, and then I will go to Krishna consciousness, our hero. So, if you all remember, those of you who had the good fortune of going to school when you were young, probably took a geometry class. And if you remember, I'm sure for all of you it was your favorite subject. So if you remember the nature of geometry, something is given, like given a right triangle, or given a parallelogram, or given something. Something has to be given. And then, not only are you given certain facts, that, for example, there's a certain kind of triangle or other kind of plane figure or whatever, but also there are certain rules. For example, the Pythagorean theorem, which the details of which I forgot. But there are certain things like, for example, in a square, the sum of all the angles have to add up to a certain number of degrees and so on. So you have something given, and then you have rules by which you can accurately do geometry, and then you solve the problem. Something is missing, then you find it out. So if nothing is given, if you're asked to solve a geometry problem and nothing is given, nothing, you can't do geometry. Something has to be given. And there have to be rules by which you proceed in your analysis or your solution. In the same way in science, science assumes many things. Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, I believe in chapter 14, says that, he makes a very interesting statement. He says, Shraddhanurupa sarvasya. Shraddhanurupa sarvasya, no. Yes. No, Shraddha bhavati. Sattvanurupa sarvasya. Shraddha bhavati bharata. That according to their existence, according to the type of person you are, you and everyone else will develop a certain kind of faith. There is no one that doesn't believe anything. Because if you said, I don't believe anything, the simple question is, do you really believe that you don't believe anything? So the fact is, at every moment, everyone is believing something. If you're just in a room right now, you believe, for example, that I'm really speaking, it's not just some bionic creation, or that I'm not a robot, or it's not, in other words, I'm a real person, and I'm actually talking to you. So about anything, so for example, in science, you can't do science unless you believe, and you certainly can't prove, there's a real physical world outside your mind. There's a philosophical position called solipsism, in which people don't believe there's a real world outside their mind. It's kind of a goofy philosophy, and if you take it too seriously, you probably get money from the government. It's for the mentally disabled. But anyway, it's the idea that at any moment, whatever experience we may be having, all you can say is that within your mind, you're experiencing something. You cannot say that the experience you have within your mind actually corresponds in any accurate, objective way to a world outside your mind. And so, fortunately, most people don't believe this, and therefore there's a little bit of sanity in the world, despite Donald Trump. And so the idea here is that you have to believe that. You have to say that. To be a scientist, you have to say, no, I accept as a fact that there is a real world to study. You also have, there's other things that have to be given to you, just like in geometry. So given, there's a real world out there. Another given is that the laws of nature are uniform everywhere. In other words, if we, let's say an astronomer receives light coming from a distant galaxy and then analyzes that light to find, figure out how far away is that galaxy, what is probably the nature of the star emitting the light or whatever, the star is emitting the light, you have to assume that the laws of nature operating in that very, very, in a galaxy far, far away, you can, in your mind, do the Star Wars theme music. But anyway, let's say in a galaxy far, far away, that the laws of nature are the same as here. Because if they're not, then you have no idea what's going on out there. So you can't prove that's the case. You can't go to, with present technology, you can't go to a star system or anywhere that's, let's say, light years away. Because, if you travel at the speed of light, which you can't do, it would take a year to get there. So it's ridiculous. And some things are like thousands of light years away. So in order to do empirical science, you have to assume that certain things are true, which you can't prove. Because if the scientist said, I can prove there's a real material world, because look, for example, here's my hand. You can see it's a real hand. That's called circular reasoning. It's a logical fallacy. Circular reasoning means that you're trying to prove something, so you give the thing you're trying to prove as evidence of itself. So it just goes around in a circle. So what you're trying to prove is there's a real material world. Only if there's a real material world is your hand real. And even if there is a real material world, we could still have doubts about your hand. But let's say if there's a real material world, your hand is real. If there's not a real material world, your hand is just one more illusion. So you can't give as evidence that here's a real thing from the material world when you're trying to prove the material world is real. So that's called circular reasoning. To get a PhD in science, you are not required to take a single course in philosophy or epistemology, which explains a lot of what scientists say. So, to do science, some things are given, and then there are rules of the road, the laws of science, and so on and so forth. And also in Krishna consciousness, some things are given. For example, when Prabhupada was discussing the philosophy of Socrates, and Socrates said that the truth is the truth, you can't refute it, Prabhupada said similarly, I accept Krishna, therefore that can't be, I can't refute Krishna, his authority. So what does this really mean in Western philosophical terms? That we accept Krishna as given, Krishna as God, or the authority of Bhagavad Gita. Of course, one may come to that conclusion through a process of meditation, thought, analysis, and so on, but in epistemology is the branch of philosophy. It's a little difficult for you girls, isn't it? Probably wondering, what is he talking about? So if you'd rather play, you can do that. But if you want to stay, you're welcome. This is kind of probably punishment for them not to listen to this. So, in Sanskrit, no, not in Sanskrit, Greek. In Greek, episteme means knowledge. So epistemology literally means the logos, the logic, the rational understanding of knowledge, which basically is, how do you know? How do you know you know? That's basically it. So, in epistemology, Aristotle pointed this out, one of the earliest members of the Hare Krishna movement. So Aristotle pointed out that if you claim that something is true, someone can say, prove it. And then when you give the explanation, they can say, prove that. And then they can say, prove that. So you can be pushed into an infinite regress of proofs. And so the way you escape an infinite regress of proofs is that you declare, you have to declare, if you've really got this item in your system, that something is self-evident. It proves itself. As they say, you can't hold a candle to the sun, because the sun illumines itself. Nothing else can illumine the sun. For example, let's say you actually have a candle, just a little candle light. If you bring some high-powered electric light to it, it will illumine the candle beyond what its own light can do. Whereas the sun, being the supreme light in our corner of the galaxy, nothing else can illumine it. So this is the same term, self-evident. It proves itself. Because if something proves itself, you don't have to go outside to prove it. This is the same term that Lord Chaitanya used, by the way. Lord Chaitanya used this exact term, self-evident, in his discussion with, I think, Sarvabhauma or Prakashananda, one of those two, where he said that the Vedas are self-evident. So what does that mean? It means that, let's say, when you chant Hare Krishna, or when you read Bhagavad Gita, you have an experience of spiritual truth so real that it proves itself, that it would be absurd to bring in some other evidence for it, because that experience of Krishna is itself real to the greatest extent of any experience. So, in other words, it proves itself to you. Go back to the scientists. They say there's a real material world. So if you say, well, how do you know that? Because they would have to say, well, it's the quality of the experience. For example, when you have a dream and then you wake up from the dream, you just know that your waking state is more real than the dream. Even if in the dream, let's say on some ethereal mental level, your senses were working, you really get into dreams. Sometimes you wake up and you're glad the dream's over. Sometimes you wake up and you're really sorry the dream's over. When I was a kid, I dreamt that I was walked into my room. I must have been about 9 years old. I walked into my room and it was filled with hundreds and thousands of toys and games. And then when I woke up and realized it was a dream, I was like really frustrated and unhappy. And yet I knew that my waking state, jagrata in Sanskrit, was more real than my sleeping state. This dream is real in the sense it's a real experience. You're actually experiencing something, but what you're experiencing doesn't actually exist outside of your mind. Whereas when you wake up, you realize you're back in an experience where what you see or hear really does correspond to an objective world outside of your mind. And so, how do we know that? That's a simple question. How do you know that? Well, ultimately, the answer would be because we exist in such a way, we're created in such a way, that we can know certain things. We just know that being awake is more real than being asleep and dreaming. So that's what a scientist would have to say, if they knew anything about philosophy, which is almost always not the case. So, when we talk about Krishna consciousness, when you chant Hare Krishna, when you worship Krishna, when you read Krishna's words, we have an experience which is not only as real as the material world, but in many ways more real. In many ways more real because when we truly experience Krishna, we understand that our experience of the material world is just like a subset. It's just one aspect of Krishna consciousness, which is greater than and ultimately more real than experiences of this world, because we're experiencing eternal truths, not temporary truths. And in the material world, what you see is never what you get, in the sense that from the point of view of physics, there's a solid table, but actually it's made of molecules and atoms that are really far apart from each other and blah, blah, blah. And so we perceive it as a solid table. Or it's a table, but no, it's actually Krishna's inferior energy. It's really just Shakti or Prakriti. And right now it's DBA, doing business as a table, but it'll become something else in the future. Whereas when you see Krishna, either in his picture or deity or through his name, it's actually, what you see is really what you get. I mean, obviously our perception is not perfect yet, but Krishna is always Krishna. And when you experience yourself as a spiritual being, that's who you really are forever. So there's something about spiritual experiences which are actually more real than material experiences. Now, and that doesn't mean the experiences of the material world are not real. It doesn't mean 2 and 2 isn't 4, or Harrisburg isn't the capital of Pennsylvania. It just means that in terms of quality of experience, it's higher. So, and ultimately, in other words, our experience of the material world doesn't explain Krishna. Some people try to do that trick, like you just think Krishna's God because blah, 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 in some pseudo-psychological theory. But actually, Krishna really does account for the material world. So when we experience Krishna, we are experiencing something which explains everything, which explains the physical world, whereas our experience of the physical world alone does not explain Krishna. Only to some extent that by looking at nature, we can understand the artistry of God. Now, in epistemology, what I've just gone through is called fundamentalism. I'm sorry, foundationalism. A little distracted there. Foundationalism. Foundationalism is a philosophical view which is very widely accepted. That let me just one second. Which is that for every system of thought, there is a for every system of thought, there has to be some foundation. You have to, just like going back to geometry, you have to assume that something is true to start working. If nothing is given in geometry, if you don't believe that in a perfect square all the angles are equal, if you don't believe in a right triangle, one angle is 90 degrees, and so on and so on. If you don't believe those things, then you can't do geometry. And so it's similar, if you don't accept there's a material world, you can't do empirical science. And you have to believe the laws of nature are uniform everywhere. So every system of thought, whether it's, let's say, deductive in the sense of classic philosophy and logic, let's say deductive, whether it's inductive as in empirical science, or whether it's ultimately Shruti. After all, these are the systems of knowledge we find even in Prabhupada's teachings and in teachings of the Acharyas. Shruti, which means hearing from authority. So there's Shruti, then there's Anuman, which you could call deduction or logic, and then inferences, logical inferences, and then there is Pratyaksha, sense evidence, which is empiricism. So for us, Krishna is the foundation of our system of thought, of our system of spiritual thought. I mean, obviously, we don't read the Bhagavad Gita to see what the weather is going to be tomorrow, or how long it takes to drive to Alabama or something. So, but in terms of understanding ultimately what is real, to understand what Krishna calls in the Gita tattva. He's like in that famous verse, try to learn the truth by approaching a guru, and or actually, what literally says is try to learn the truth by submission, service, and then those who have knowledge will give you knowledge, will teach you knowledge. And so Krishna describes who are the people that have knowledge, who are the people that are bona fide teachers. Krishna says, it may sound tautological, but it actually is making a good point. He says those who have knowledge and give knowledge. Like if you go to a store and you want to buy a lemonade, but it's a hardware store and they don't sell lemonade, they can't give you what they haven't got. Or if you ask someone for a donation, they have no money in their pocket, they can't give you what they haven't got. So Krishna is making, in a sense, a simple point, but it's profound. Those who have knowledge can give you knowledge. Upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas. Krishna puts these two words together, jnanam, jnaninas. They will teach knowledge who have knowledge. And so, and what does Krishna mean by knowledge? He says, Upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattva darshina. He says those who have knowledge are tattva darshina. And so both these words are very significant. Darshana means seers, those who see something. And so first of all, Krishna is saying that whatever that knowledge is, you have to see it. You have to really experience it deeply. Not just like you memorize the doctrine of your church or something, your credo. It's a question of realizing it deeply, of seeing it, in a sense, with the mind's eye. And what you have to see, Krishna calls tattva. And tattva is often translated as truth, as in Vedanti tat, tattva vidam, tattvam, and so on. But also tattva is used commonly, for example, Vishnu tattva, Jiva tattva. So what does this word mean? Tat means that. It's a simple demonstrative pronoun, that. In fact, in English, you take the Sanskrit word, just add a little h, and you get English. So tat means that. And tvam is a suffix in Sanskrit meaning existing as something. So tattva actually means existing as that, or being that. So what does that mean? In Sanskrit, philosophical Sanskrit is very sophisticated. And they have all kinds of very condensed jargon. So because tat is a demonstrative pronoun, which means a pronoun that points something out, like he or she. So when you say he or she or that, when you say that, you're talking about something which can actually be pointed out. And so tat in Sanskrit comes to mean a real thing, a real object, something you can actually demonstrate or point out. And so, so tattvam, that's what the word actually means. So in that sense, it means existing as a real thing. And that's why it's used to indicate a fundamental category of real thing, just like Vishnu Tattva. In a sense, it's a category with only one member, God. But because Krishna expands himself into many plenary forms, they're all Krishna. We're actually monotheists. But all those different forms of Krishna are in the category of Vishnu Tattva. And so there is a category of real thing, which is God. Then there's Jiva Tattva. Jiva means, of course, if you change the J to V, you get Spanish, Viva, the Portuguese. So the Jiva Tattva means there is a category of real things who are individual souls. So all the individual souls that exist are you could say, an ontological category. It's a category. It's a type of real thing that exists in the world. And of course, the third one is Prakriti Tattva, or nature. I mean, inanimate nature, dead matter, if you want to use that term, as a category of real thing. And so Krishna says, one who knows Tattva, those who see Tattva, see these distinctions, are actually qualified to teach it. So, interestingly, to understand these three things, God, the soul, and nature, you have to make this distinction. Now, the word for distinction in Sanskrit is vishesha. Vishesha means, distinction. So, those who cannot properly distinguish between God, the soul, and matter. For example, they think the soul is God, category mistake. Or they think Krishna is an individual soul, category mistake. Or they think that the soul is the body, the soul is Prakriti, another boo-boo. Or they think that Krishna's body is material, another blunder. So, if you cannot properly make these distinctions, God, the soul, and matter, you don't understand these three realities, then you are called nirvishesha. Because you cannot, nir means without, or lacking, like nirvana, lacking vana. So nirvishesha, shunyavadi. So we translate that as impersonalism. It literally means people who cannot properly distinguish between God, the soul, and matter. In the case of impersonalists, they think that they're God, or we're all God, we're all some kind of collective corporate God. They often say you can't explain the truth in words for the simple reason that their teachings are ultimately extremely incoherent. And therefore, in their case, you're right. You can't really logically explain it in words. So, that's called nirvishesha. In the case of Krishna, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, talking about Krishna, the process of bhakti yoga, he says it's pratyakshavagaman dharmyam, raja vidya, raja dharma, pavitram idam uttamam, pratyakshavagaman. Krishna says that Krishna consciousness is understood, avagama. Sanskrit is very interesting. Ava in Sanskrit means downward. And therefore, one who crosses down, literally crosses down from the spiritual realm to this world is called avatara. That's what the word means. Literally crossing down from the spiritual realm to this realm. So, ava means downward, and ga is just English go. That's where we get the English go, ga in Sanskrit. And so, avaga, or avagamam, means literally going deeply into something. And so it's one of the ways in Sanskrit that you say to really understand something, to go deeply into it, avagam, avagachati. And so, therefore, this is the word Krishna uses, and pratyaksha, aksha means the eye, but since the eye is kind of like, you could say, the lead sense, like they say, seeing is believing. No one says hearing is believing, or touching is believing, or smelling is believing, right? I guess, actually, in a perfume competition, they would say smelling is believing. But that is such a particular case that it has not become a general phenomenon. The general expression is that seeing is believing. So therefore, aksha, which means vision of the eye, in Sanskrit also comes to mean the senses in general. And prati means something like going against, not necessarily in the sense of opposing, but just like coming up against. And so when your senses come up against the objects, pratyaksha, that's described as direct perception. I think in the BBT translation it's described as understood by direct perception. And the actual word Krishna uses is pratyakshavagamam, to go deeply down into something by bringing your senses directly up against the object. Very interesting Sanskrit. So, Krishna says that you understand all this by direct perception. By direct, you see how your life is changing, your character, your consciousness. And the experience we have of Krishna, if we're doing this right, the experience we have of Krishna is irrefutable. It would be absolutely, it would be completely irrational for us to explain our experience of Krishna any other way, to say, well, it's just my mind playing tricks on me, some psychological reductionism, it reduces down to some psychological thing, or, whatever. No, it's actually irreducible. For example, you could say that actually, right now, you were just some kind of gelatinous brain in a bottle somewhere in some laboratory, and there's actually Descartes gives this example, and there's some evil scientist playing with you in different ways and making you think, let's say in your case, that you're in the Chicago area, that you're wearing blue jeans, or, whatever, or you can't wait to overeat this evening, which, of course, one of the regular principles of the Hare Krishna movement, that when in doubt, overeat. So, anyway, so I mean, you could say that. You could say that maybe I'm just a brain in a bottle in the laboratory of some evil scientist, but actually, the nature of our experience is such that we go with the much more plausible explanation. No, we're really in a material world. We're really in a body. And when we assume that to be true, things work. For example, in science, basically you need a theory which is internally consistent. For example, you can't have a scientific theory that, let's say that fire can burn wood or fire can't burn wood under the same conditions. Obviously, maybe wood that's underwater can't be burned by fire. But if you say in the same relevant conditions, you can burn wood, no, you can't burn wood. So, it would be irrational for us. We would actually be fanatical and irrational if, based on our experience of Krishna, we tried to explain it in some other way, other than, well, I had that experience because Krishna is real. That is actually the most rational explanation because it corresponds to the nature of our self-evident experience. And so, what I'm doing right now is not only, preaching to you, hoping that in the future you may give me donations if you ever make a lot of money. But apart from that, the idea is that Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that in chapter 10, verse 10:10, he says, Teshang satata juktanang bhajatang priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tang jenamam upajanti te. Very interesting. Krishna says, Teshang, for them, satata juktanam, we're always engaged, always practicing Krishna consciousness. Bhajatang priti purvakam, and worshiping me or adoring me with love. Purva in Sanskrit means first or previous. It's actually probably cognate, the English word previous, PRV, and then purva. So purva means previous, first, in the sense previous, in other words, that which comes first. So, and purva ka is sort of like an abbreviation of kara, to do or make. And so purvaka means making something the priority, even like purvaka, priority, making something the priority, making something foremost. And so Krishna says, for those who are worshiping me, priti, of course, obviously means love, just another way of saying prema, in the same root. So priti purvakam literally means worshiping me, making love the priority. That's literally what Krishna says. So, Teshang Satatajutanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam. Krishna says, for those people, Dadami, I give, Buddhi Yogam Tam, I give this Buddhi Yoga, which we'll talk about, Jena, by which Mam Upajantite, they approach me. What's very interesting is that Krishna says we approach him not just by sentimentalism, but we actually, of course, the sentiment has to be there, the love has to be there, but we approach Krishna by the spiritual practice of reason, of intelligence. So this is a fascinating aspect of Bhagavad Gita. Obviously, Krishna says ultimately, sarva dharmam parityaja mam ekam sharanam braja, give up all your other pious hobbies and just take shelter of me. And so, but also throughout the Gita, Krishna emphasizes Buddhi Yoga. For example, when Krishna explains to Arjuna in chapter 2, in the first half of chapter 2 of the Gita, how basically you're not your body, and the nature of the soul, the nature of the body. And then Krishna says, Esha teya vihita sankhye buddhya yogeti mangshanu. Krishna says, I think it's 239, that what I've just explained to you, that whole first part of chapter 2, where Krishna explains you're not the body, you're an eternal soul. And then Krishna says, what I just explained to you is buddhi. And so if you look at what buddhi means, it means intelligence, but analytic intelligence. In other words, there's two ways we understand things. One is called, according to the Gita, if you look at how Krishna describes buddhi and jnana, analytic intelligence and knowledge, how he describes these in three modes of nature, buddhi means taking things apart. Like you want to know, let's say, what a motor is, you take all the parts apart, and you study everything, how you see how does it all fit together. But then, jnana would mean putting it all back together. In other words, how does the whole thing function? Once everything's working, what is it? And what does it do? So, in Sanskrit, that's called samasa and vyasa. Sam means together, like in Sankirtan, chanting together. So, and actually, I'll throw this in. We have the Sanskrit prefix sang, together, like Sankirtan. We actually have that in English still, through the Greek. The Greeks, when the Greeks pronounced it, they added a sort of an umlaut sound, so it became syn. But they spelled that S-Y-N. And since we don't do that umlaut thing in English, we pronounce S-Y-N as sin, as in synthesis. So synthesis means the together thesis. These, thesis, antithesis, and then when you put everything together, are like symbiotic. Bios in Greek means life. So symbiotic or symbiosis literally means sort of life together, life, different lives helping each other. And so that S-Y-N or S-Y-M, anyway, I could go into more of the grammar. Why, for example, in synthesis, it's S-Y-N as in Nancy, and in symbiosis, it's S-Y-M as in mother. There's actually phonology explains that, but which also is from Sanskrit. But the point here is that the point really is that asa means placing. So samasa means placing things together, the big picture, your big worldview. How, apart from all your little issues and points, what's the big picture for you? And then V is the opposite of some. If you know Italian, in Italian, the way they say, like, get out of here, away, they say via, via. So via means apart. That's Sanskrit, V. So the opposite of samasa, putting things together, is vyasa, taking things apart. That's why Vyasa is called Vyasa, because he divided the Vedas. So the word Vyasa actually means the one who separated things, in this case, the Vedas. So buddhi is that faculty we have which engages in Vyasa, analyzing things, taking them apart, making distinctions. Like some of the examples Krishna gives in the Gita, buddhi, are knowing what is dangerous, what is not dangerous. Some people think it's dangerous to join the Hare Krishna movement. Well, that's an interesting point. But anyway, let's assume for the sake of solidarity and mutual enthusiasm that it's not dangerous to join the Hare Krishna movement. Or, for example, people think it's not dangerous to engage in extreme sports, and some of these people win Darwin Awards. Some of these people, actually end up dead. The Darwin Awards are given to people who did something so stupid that caused their own destruction that their contribution to humanity was removing themselves from the gene pool. Anyway, we don't want to be unkind to those poor souls. Anyway, so jnana in the Gita means like worldview, like what's your worldview, and buddhi means how do you make distinctions? Dangerous, not dangerous, right or wrong. I should do this, I shouldn't do that. That's buddhi that makes all these distinctions. So when we accept Krishna consciousness, now we know people approach Krishna for different reasons. Not that you have to be a philosopher to love Krishna or go back to Godhead, or get your share of Mahaprasadam. But ultimately, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, those who do take seriously this knowledge are most dear to me. I don't mean to say philosophers are more dear to Krishna than pujaris or something like that. But whatever your particular service is, whatever your inclination is, whether you're entrepreneurial or artistic or intellectual or whatever you are, we should really try to understand Krishna and Krishna consciousness. So Krishna consciousness, again, begins with a self-evident foundation and proceeds from there within a very logical system that is internally consistent and self-coherent. And so we have all structurally and whatever, we have all the elements of real knowledge. We have all the elements of real knowledge. Some people may say, prove it to me, if only. It's like, for example, I'll give you an example. When Einstein developed some of his, spectacular, or made some of his spectacular discoveries, I saw this in an astronomy textbook when I was taking an astronomy course at UCLA. The New York Times reporter was interviewing the head of the Royal Astronomy Society in England, which was kind of dealing with Einstein's discovery. And the New York Times reporter said, can you explain this in a layman's terms? Can you explain this in a simple way so my readers can understand it? And this astronomer said, actually, no. So, in other words, there's something in scholarship and science called referee journals. In other words, you can't, if you're a flat earther, if you believe the earth is flat, you're not really going to be able to publish your theory in a prestigious scientific journal. Refereed means that when you want to publish something, then other scholars or scientists who are considered to be competent in their field have to referee. They have to look at what you're writing and decide whether this is worthy of the attention of other scientists or scholars. And so ultimately, a scientist or a historian or anyone, they have to prove their theories to another scientist or scholar. The scientist doesn't try to prove his theory to non-scientists. They're not qualified to evaluate it. So in every field, when you say prove it, if you say to somebody, prove it to me, you are assuming or claiming that you are qualified to evaluate the proof. So if someone says to me, prove that Krishna is God or prove there is a God, what first occurs to me is you are assuming, you are claiming to be a qualified evaluator. Is that really the case? By your life, by your practices, are you really qualified? Now, some things actually can be observed by even an ordinary person. For example, when we take to Krishna consciousness, we develop much better standards of morality, most of it. And so there are, and Prabhupada used to always talk about this. Prabhupada used to always say that my disciples were following these principles and so on and so forth, and therefore he gave that as evidence that their lives were being transformed. In any case, maybe I'll kind of end my little discussion here. It's almost 45 minutes, and that's like a nice time to give a lecture. Give a lecture without driving people to desperation, like, is he ever going to stop? So, perhaps now, if you have any questions on these topics, I guess the real thing is we should be confident. We should know that we have an authentic, powerful system of knowledge that has all the elements of a genuine system of knowledge. It's internally consistent, and it works in the world. It works in our lives. And that's all you can say about any scientific theory. It's internally consistent, and it works in the world. And so both those elements are there in our spirituality, our Krishna consciousness. So, thank you for your attention. And any questions? Yes.
I have two questions. My first question is, in literatures like the Bhakti Rationality Sindhu, when we hear about the different type of adhikarins who can be successful in bhakti, and the person with the best qualification is said to be very expert in scriptures and logic. And many times we get this question from many devotees who may not be as intellectually gifted. They get a doubt in how much are they needing to actually know in order to become successful in bhakti. That's my first question. Maybe
Okay. Let me answer that before we go on, because it's the age of Kali and our memories are short. I would say that you either have to know or you have to know who knows. For example, I'm not a dentist, which may shock some of you, because I look so much like a dentist. Just kidding. But I generally know who is a dentist. And so I don't have to be a dentist. You know, if I go to someone who really is a dentist, I get my teeth taken care of properly. Or, an authentic lawyer. Or, all kinds of things. For example, if I have to take a flight, then I want to go on an airline which usually doesn't crash, and where I assume that they have rigorous standards of safety, both mechanical and pilot training and so on and so forth. And so, if you know who knows, you get the same benefit as knowing. And as far as, how do you know who knows? We should remember what Krishna says, that it's a practical process. It's not word games. It's a practical process. So if you, let's say, approach a guru or just another devotee with whom you may possibly have a friendship, when you, and then you just see, like, is this working for me? Not in a selfish way, but I think in an enlightened sense of self-interest. That, for example, let's take the case of a guru, which is, perhaps the most important business decision of your life. Who you're going to give your dakshina to. So in the case of approaching a guru, first of all, it should be a relationship. You should have a sense that the guru actually likes me, or has time for me. In other words, there's supposed to be a real relationship. It shouldn't just, of course, for many devotees, the relationship is through, let's say, hearing the guru speak, sometimes through media. But let's say, if just due to the demands of the office and the limitations of human life, let's say a guru can't hang out all the time with every one of his hundreds of disciples. But if when the guru speaks, even if you hear it through media, if you genuinely experience that this person is really speaking to me, and I feel that this person really understands me, even if I don't spend a lot of time with this guru, but the way this guru is describing life and describing, our struggles in life and our dreams and how we get there and so on, I feel this person really understands me, understands my condition, and really speaks to me. And then sometimes if you do occasionally have a question, that the guru actually is, can respond. And of course, the guru has to examine the disciple. And I won't make any more jokes about money. We won't talk about credit checks or anything. So the guru has to examine the disciple and feel if this person really gets it. Because people, some people, devotees, a lot of devotees are just very sincere. They really just want to go back to God. But, inevitably, because we're conditioned, some people had really great parents. Some people had really lousy parents. Some people were happy children. Some people were miserable or even traumatized children. And they're searching for a father figure or a mother figure or this or that. And so, the extent to which we're not really Krishna conscious, the extent to which we don't know ourselves well. It's like what I say about psychology and philosophy. Even if you don't study it, you have one. And so I would say to approach a guru successfully and to find the right person, you require a certain amount of self-knowledge, even though the purpose of approaching a guru is self-realization, but you've got to bring something to it. If you're totally unaware that your attitude toward a guru, sometimes angry or sometimes worshiping, has something to do with your psychology, if you're totally unaware of that, then you may not act objectively. You may not act in your own self-interest. You may commit offenses, or you may go down the wrong road. And so once you have to self-examination, introspection. It's a very good idea. It's not a very complicated, exotic process. It's just really try to understand what are my real motives, and what do I really need, and does this person really relate? It's like getting married. I mean, I'm not recommending that gurus marry their female disciples. I'm just saying that it's like you have to make a judgment. You have to make a decision on does this relationship really work in Krishna consciousness? Is this relationship going to sustain you spiritually?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Sure.
My follow-up question is, when, if ever, does knowledge become an obstacle to the development of bhakti? Because oftentimes we've heard these sorts of messages.
Right. Knowledge, like everything else, becomes an obstacle when you become attached to it rather than Krishna. If you just think it's like, to use an archaic term, really groovy, this knowledge, and you're just kind of enjoying your own intellectuality and so on, and you forget Krishna, so that it's like it amazes me in academics, I have to admit. It just astonishes me, like the things that scholars will get excited about, which to me seem quite trivial. But it's just knowledge for its own sake, trivia for its own sake in many cases. And so there's a kind of knowledge where you don't really care. Let's say you study the history of Kerala, the southwestern state of India. And so a scholar may not really care about the state, may not really admire the culture. It's just it's like when you're playing, let's say you're playing soccer, you're kicking the ball. You don't have an emotional tie to the ball. It's not that you want to take the ball home with you and put little clothes on it and offer it food. So the ball is just an instrument through which to exhibit your skill, and you kick it, and you don't love the ball. You just want to use it to show your skill and earn money. And so in the same way, for some people, when they study this or that field as scholars, they don't really care about that stuff. It's just a raw material to exhibit their intelligence, gain prestige, or themselves just enjoy being clever. I remember I had this history professor at Berkeley when I was about 19 or 20. He was really funny. I mean, he looked like, maybe you're too young for this, but he looked very much like Jack Benny, that old comedian. In fact, he came in one day to class and said, the first day of class, and said, "First of all, please understand that I'm not Jack Benny." And so, but he was really funny, and we were talking. He was a scholar of European history, and I remember he was talking about the Habsburgs one time, and then he just said, "Yeah," I said, "I wish I never met the guys," because that was his field. So when you get to the point where you just want to be clever, you want knowledge, because in a sense, being very intellectual, intelligent, kind of a power over other people, you can impress other people, or you may just really enjoy seeing all the connections, understanding history or science or this or that. So when you're really more attached to that than Krishna, or when Krishna is just a pretext, like you really just want to learn Sanskrit or you want to read Shastras because you enjoy being smart, and you don't really have the mood of a humble servant. It's just like, let's say you're a leader in a spiritual movement. And let's say you start to really feel that I'm better than other people, I really have power over them, and that can become a way of life. It's not a very healthy way of life. A leader really has to think that I'm a servant to these people. And frankly, whether you're a temple president or a guru or a GBC or head bottle washer in a prestigious mandir, whatever position you may have, you can become attached to that. You can really start to believe that these people are beneath me, that I'm their leader, that everything I say is wonderful because they say it's wonderful. And so at that point, you are, going off the rails. In other words, a normal Amtrak experience. So knowledge is like everything else. Like we wield power. For example, you may marry, let's say a man marries a woman marries a man in the classical notion of marriage. And so obviously you can really see that other person as a spirit soul, eternal servant of Krishna, and that's how husbands and wives have profound respect for each other, because the basis of love, there has to be respect. You can't love somebody but not respect them, really. I mean, and even if the person's behavior is kind of, not very pleasing, but you have to see them as an eternal soul. And so, or you can get married and just think that this person exists for my enjoyment. So whether it's marriage, whether it's knowledge, whether it's leadership, art, in any aspect of life, you can do it for Krishna and really do it with the mood of a servant, or you can exploit that ability or activity or situation in order to, as they say, puff yourself up. So knowledge is the same. That's why Krishna says, very interesting, in that verse where he says, Pandita Samadarshana, the wise have equal vision. Krishna says, to give an example of the highest class of human being, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne, one who sees Brahmane, a Brahmana who's endowed with knowledge, but also humility. Vinit, common name in India, is from Vinaya. Vinit means like humble. That's actually. So Vinaya, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne. If you're only endowed with knowledge, but not humble, then you haven't really, first of all, you haven't really realized your knowledge, because the nature of reality is such. It is simply the nature of reality itself that if you understand it, you will be humble. And so that's why Krishna says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne, Brahmane, and so on. See all these equally.
I actually have one more question, but I'll leave it. You were mentioning in your class, Maharaj, about the self-evident nature of Krishna conscious experience. Sometimes, as practitioners, we don't always feel that we have a self-evident experience of Krishna consciousness. And our practice of Krishna consciousness is based on reason and logic, and it makes sense. But without a self-evident experience, or at least an experience which we qualify as that was Krishna, then sometimes we start to lose ground in our faith.
Yes.
Like, is it real? Is it not real? So how do we deal with having a strength of conviction because of knowledge?
Yes.
But a lack of identifying an actual self-evident experience?
Yes. I think the key here is to remember what Krishna says in the Gita, Jai jata mam prapadyante, tang sataiva bhajami aham. everyone as they approach me, I accept them exactly in that way. So if I'm, let's say, let's say one day you wake up and Krishna is just not as real for you as you would like. The obvious reason is that you are not as real for Krishna that day. So Krishna doesn't force himself on you. Krishna, he doesn't have emotional problems. He's not needy. So whenever you feel that you're a little distant from Krishna, the reason is that Krishna is just reciprocating, because Krishna has noticed that you're not really paying attention. It's like, for example, let's say someone invites you over to their house, and you go over there, and they're just kind of, they're polite, but not really giving you attention, not really kind of neglecting you. Then what are you going to say? Actually, I have to go. I just remembered that I have to be somewhere else, anywhere else. And so when you're not feeling satisfied with Krishna, it must be that he's not satisfied with you. And so, in other words, why don't you take the initiative? Because Krishna does perfectly reciprocate. If you're not feeling Krishna's presence strongly, it's not his fault. He's not playing hard to get. He's not, it's just that he wants you to take him more seriously, and then he'll present himself.
We have another question.
Yes. Peace.
I had a question about sort of like Vaishnava history, and I was wondering if you could help me understand something. When Vishnu Thakur in his purport in Gita would sometimes talk about giving up karma and dhyan and just doing bhakti exclusively, was he referring exclusively to like the culture of renounced people and this idea of people like in our days where we work and we give some of our fruits to Krishna? This wasn't exactly what Vaishnavism was 200 years ago, 300 years ago.
Right. I think there's a difference between giving up, for example, karma and giving up karma yoga, which you don't give up. So if you, and that's the whole point of the Gita. Krishna didn't tell Arjuna, give up your Kshatriya position and move into a Hare Krishna temple. Actually, there weren't any Hare Krishna temples back then. That's, one interesting thing, if you read Mahabharata, or even the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, about that historical period 5,000 years ago, one striking thing is there are no organized religions. But anyway, Bhaktisiddhanta in this age, Bhaktisiddhanta did say that religious organizations are a necessary evil. So, so then your question precisely is, say it again one more time.
When Krishna Chakravarti Thakur
Oh yeah, karma. So karma yoga. Krishna told Arjuna, you cannot give up your karma, but you must perform it as karma yoga. You must do it in devotion. So when you take that action, Krishna, don't forget that Krishna says in chapter 4, Gahana karmano gatihi. The ways of karma are mysterious. That bodhavyam chapya karmana, that you have to understand what is karma, vikarma, akarma, and so on. And so, same thing, jnana. For example, at a certain point in my life, I studied Sanskrit, or philosophy, or whatever, the life of the Beatles or something. No, I forget that. But let's say, so by studying certain things, I can now talk to you. That was Prabhupada's order to me. Prabhupada, when I joined the Hare Krishna movement in 1969, I was 20 years old, and in Berkeley, I was a student, I wrote Prabhupada a letter. The first letter I wrote Prabhupada, just like Prabhupada when he went to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he got the instruction that became the theme of his life, the inspiration of his life. The same thing happened to me when I wrote my first letter to Prabhupada, asking, should I stay in school or drop out? And Prabhupada wrote back and said, stay in school, because I want you to be well-educated, nicely educated, so that you can preach to other educated people. So Prabhupada's first order to me, which really became the kind of the inspiration of my life, was to get knowledge, but in Krishna's service. So when Vishwanath says give up karma and jnana, that's when you do karma for its own sake, not for Krishna's sake. Or you do jnana for its own sake, for your sake, not for Krishna. But when you do karma and jnana, because, karma just means action. Arjuna fought a battle. That's karma, that's action. And Krishna gave Arjuna knowledge. In fact, Krishna says, Jnanavan mam prapadyate. Bahunam, after many lives, actually it says after many births, those who have knowledge surrender to me. So Krishna never rejects knowledge and never rejects action. He's only rejecting action and knowledge done for their own sake and not for Krishna's sake.
I have 2 more questions if no one else has.
Well, it seems to be a day of threes, so go ahead.
I was wondering, Maharaj, about this question about experiencing Krishna that you mentioned, experiencing Krishna. H.D.Goswami gives this sadhana krama. I think it's in the Bhakti Sangha when he talks about non-stubborn, non-kirtan, non-smana. So do you think as practitioners of bhakti should be very scientifically focused exclusively on experiencing of Krishna through this sadhana krama, or can Krishna reveal himself through some other possibility also? This is a little similar to this question.
Well, Krishna can reveal himself just when you're walking down the street. And so, but the word krama in Sanskrit literally means step. For example, and uru means great. So Krishna is called Uru Krama because he took those great steps as Lord Vamana. Also Tri Vikrama, which in American Sanskrit is Trivikram. But it's, Tri of course means 3. Tri means 3, and V again means away or wide. So Krishna, because he took 3 wide steps, he's called Tri Vikrama. So it's also, just like in English, a step is literally with your foot, but a step also means, a certain stage in a process. And it's the same in Sanskrit. So sadhana krama means the steps of spiritual practice. If you look at, I think what is clearly the main list of those steps in our tradition, Ado Shraddha, Tatak Sadhu Sangha, and so on, Bhajana Kriya, it simply means in the beginning, or at first, Ado at first, Shraddha. In other words, you have to at least believe that there's something here which could benefit me. If you don't think that there's anything in Krishna consciousness that could do any good for me, there's, obviously you won't come back. You will not be a satisfied customer. So in the beginning, you have to at least believe that there's something of value here. That's Shraddha. And then Tatak Sadhu Sangha. Because of that, you want to associate with devotees. You enjoy association with devotees. And then Bhajana Kriya, devotional activities. Because if you hang out with devotees, you end up hearing about Krishna, offering food, that's what they do. So, and then Anartha Nivritti, which means literally the turning away, the turning back of useless things, bad habits. And then Nishta. Sta is English, stand, status, that's all Sanskrit, sta. And so Nishta, ni means within, like to really stand firmly on something. That's what the word Nishta means. And so you stand firmly in Krishna consciousness. And ruchis, and then you really start to have a great time all the time. Human life goes fast when you're having fun. And so on all the way to prema. So that's the sequence. So krama, step, also means sequence in Sanskrit. But as far as these things, it's not where, I personally just try to do what I do. I wake up in the morning, I think of Krishna, and I, of course, would chant japa, and I just immediately start thinking, I've got to do my service. I have to just do what I do for Krishna. And so I'm not sort of minutely meditating on, but some people maybe are more technical than me. Personally, I never met a technical thing that I ever liked. I was like, look at the big picture. So, except Sanskrit grammar, actually, I kind of like that. So I think if we just try our best to follow principles the best we can, and you can't do more than your best. So if you're doing your best and someone else is doing their best and someone does more, but you're both doing your best, in a sense you're both equal. So, because you can't do more than your best, right? So if you're doing your best and trying to follow the principle as well as you can and trying to serve Krishna as much as you can, then these stages just manifest in time. And of course, knowing them, that's why Rupa teaches, knowing them will help us to identify ourselves, kind of locate yourself on the map, like the map of life. Like, where are we now? Honey, where are we? And so, then you look at the map. So in that way, it's Rupa Goswami is just sort of mapping out spiritual progress so you can see where you are, what I need to work on.
Thank you so much. This is my last question. Oftentimes when I'm doing history and literature, and I tell people I'm a monk, they say, "Oh, I love Buddhism." That's the spontaneous response I get. And I often think about how Sri Bhaktisiddhanta, he took many things from around the Krishna mission, right? Like the Origin
Yeah.
various things he took, like Brahmachari staying in the monk. And what is your opinion on modern day situation and how the Buddhists have done a pretty good job of making people aware of terminologies like monk and moksha?
Yeah. Funny you should ask that.
Should we take
Because-
from their tradition to help us? Or
Yeah. I have a stump speech on this topic. So, well, first of all, we have to keep in mind there are two Buddhisms in America. There is the Buddhism of immigrant families. That's just their family religion. They come from Japan or China or other places, and that's just the family religion. And that's just their family religion, and so they have their temples, and it's all basically, Oriental diaspora going to their Buddhist temples.
the Hindu temples in America?
Yeah, exactly. Then there's another Buddhism, which is the Buddhism for educated Westerners. Now, Westerners are like get into Buddhism in the Western version of it, but if you go to sort of an immigrant, ethnic Buddhist temple with immigrant families, you won't see a lot of Westerners. So the Hare Krishna movement, we tend to be the immigrant community and not the one that appeals to Westerners. And so the whole point of my spectacular deviation called Krishna West, which threatens life on earth as we know it, and is the worst thing in ISKCON since burnt sweet rice. Is that we obviously have to package Krishna consciousness, keyword package, not the content. We don't change the content. Some people think the package is the content. And they actually don't know it. Anyway. So I've made all these points in paper I've written. So we have to do what Vaishnavas have been doing for thousands of years, fit in. You can't change a society that you're not part of. If you are the radical outsider, basically you're just going to attract people who want to be radical outsiders. And so it doesn't mean changing the essence. And so you can say, well, how do we know it's the essence? Well, we've got a list in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, chapter 6. And so, actually, I've made this point over and over again, that if you study Prabhupada's teachings in his life, there were really three things he didn't want you to change. Like, if you mess with this, you void your warranty. And so those three things are, obviously, our philosophy, our spiritual practice that Prabhupada gave us, and, frankly, our institution. Prabhupada said we should think like that English saying, "England with all thy faults, I love thee." And since we have so many faults, we can love a lot. So Prabhupada, in other words, we shouldn't be rats leaving a sinking ship. ISKCON doesn't belong to me, or you, or the GBC, or the sannyasis. Whoever may think it belongs to them is actually wrong. ISKCON belongs to Prabhupada and Krishna. And so if we see something which strikes us as not the best, we should be part of the solution. We should be part of the solution. That's what I'm doing. I'm engaged in my epic battles with certain ultra-conservatives. And so from my point of view, I respect I'm pro-choice when it comes to, like, whether you want to have the Indian approach or the Western approach. I'm pro-choice. But if you choose to pursue Krishna consciousness within a more Western, let's say in a more Western style, you are not a second-class devotee. It's not that someday if you advance more, you will realize that you really want to wear a dhoti. And it's just because of the covering of Maya, you couldn't see it before. When you take a long piece of cloth and wrap it a certain way, it actually takes on a divine spiritual nature. Then even glows in the dark. So, and actually there are so many statements from Prabhupada to this effect. But when you say keep Prabhupada in the center, it's really important we don't filter out half of Prabhupada and then put the half we like in the center and say that, anyone, if you want to keep Prabhupada in the center, you've got to just focus on this half. Prabhupada was a complex, brilliant, liberal, open-minded person. And so what I'm doing in my Krishna West enterprise is just trying to reactivate all these instructions from Prabhupada that have been forgotten. Prabhupada actually gave us explicitly the tools we need to get this movement going again. But some people think those tools are somehow bad. But they're actually given by Prabhupada, and they in no way compromise or diminish our spirituality. And history and social science show that if you want to influence a society, you can only be so much different from them. And you cross a certain line, you're not a contender. So my idea was, as compassionate Vaishnavas, we're supposed to be oceans of mercy. I mean, sometimes we're not even like puddles of mercy. So to me, to be an ocean of mercy means that I will not compromise or violate my basic principles. That's not negotiable. My philosophy, my spiritual practice, my loyalty to Prabhupada, that's not up for discussion. But keeping those principles intact, I have extraordinary room to maneuver so that I can present Krishna consciousness in a way which is relevant. For example, when I joined the Hare Krishna movement in '69, and I was a student at Berkeley, and so I actually arranged. It's amazing, because I think of myself at 20 years old, I think, like, how did I even feed myself and everything? So I think I was so spaced out. But anyway, I was 20 years old, and so I brought with me to the temple a 3-piece suit, a really nifty olive-colored, dark olive 3-piece suit, the vest and everything, that my family bought me for my youngest brother's bar mitzvah. So I brought and somehow or other I thought, well, such a nice suit, you can't just throw it away. I had some notion of Yukta Vairagya. And so then I put on this suit with a nice shirt and tie, and I walked over to the university and got a credit course for the Hare Krishna movement. A credit course at the #1 public university in the country. And of course, the dean of student affairs said, "Are you sure this is not religion?" "Oh no, it's anything but." So anyway, so I wore that suit, and that was like in 1969. So I think the truth is what works, and so we are having extraordinary results trying to fit in with Americans. Obviously, fit in doesn't mean go for a Big Mac or something, or it doesn't mean anything sinful. The point is that from a sociological perspective, we can easily identify a certain perimeter, a certain cultural perimeter in America, in the Western world, where if you're inside that perimeter, you are a respectable citizen. You're a normal you may be this or maybe that, but you're a normal, respectable person. And if you're outside that perimeter, you're weird. Perhaps crazy. And so, just ask yourself whether we're inside or outside that perimeter. So I'm saying, within that perimeter, you can be vegetarian, you can be devoted to God, you can chant Hare Krishna, you can do everything. You can follow Prabhupada within that perimeter, if you conduct yourself appropriately. You can strictly follow all of the essential principles of Krishna consciousness and yet be a fully respectable member of society. I also believe in, dressing nicely. I don't mean Brooks Brothers or something, but because the verse that inspires me is the Bhagavatam verse, Titikshava Karunika Suhridaksarva Dehinam, that the Vaishnavas are merciful to all embodied beings. So in order for people to approach us, it helps a lot if they feel comfortable with us and don't feel like, oh my God, what planet did you just come from? And so if I present myself in a certain way in public, let's say I present myself with a very Indian look. What I'm doing is I'm greatly facilitating this movement for Indians or Indophiles. People just love Indian culture. For them, I'm making it really easy. But I'm at the same time moving away from people who don't have that particular taste. It's an acquired taste. So why, if I'm supposed to be equal to everyone, why do I present myself in a way that makes it much easier for some people and much more difficult for other people? And then I say, well, I proved my point, because the people I made it much easier for taking to it, which shows they're the only sincere people. And the fact that I made it much easier for them and very hard for other people, that had nothing to do with it. So I want to be in the cultural center. For example, I'm wearing this incredibly stylish collar shirt right now. And in an act of savoir-faire, I even only buttoned one button. So, but the point is, when you wear a shirt like this in America, it doesn't mean you're a Democrat, it doesn't mean you're Republican, it doesn't mean you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist. It just means you're a normal, respectable person. That's the message. It doesn't mean you're like a kooky bohemian artist. So my point is, I believe that Vaishnavas, by their external presentation, should situate themselves in the center of society, which we can actually identify, in the center of society, so that we are equidistant to everyone. Everyone has a fair shot to feel comfortable with it. And so if I'm like probably used to talk about, if I'm like a slob, then I should seriously consider de-slobbing, because people don't like slobs. So Prabhupada once said, actually, he said, I know that you, my disciples, don't care about your appearance and all that, but for my sake, you should look like ladies and gentlemen. So, if you're just living for yourself, you can dress however you like. It doesn't matter. But if you consider yourself a servant of the Sankirtan movement, Gaura-Nitai and Prabhupada, then it does matter. So we shouldn't dress selfishly. I mean, one example of selfish dressing is, I like Western clothes. Another example of selfish dressing is, I like Indian clothes. Ultimately, we have a job to do. And if we are just trying to please ourselves, we're not really understanding Bhakti Yoga. Trying to spread the Sankirtan movement.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
One of the things that's very distinctly otherworldly about our movement is when we go out, say for public performances around Sankirtan, we're just sitting, and it's just the whole thing is so otherworldly for most people. Yet it is such a crucial aspect of our philosophy. We have to, but you see, we have to separate the detail from the essential principle. What is essential is chanting and teaching people to chant Krishna's names. Or you could say chanting in public places. That's the principle. My point is, we should do Harinam Sankirtan in an appropriate, culturally appropriate,
according to the country we're in, a culturally appropriate time, place, and manner. So to say that we should chant Hare Krishna in public, yeah, of course. It doesn't mean that we have to do so in a way which many people find strange, off-putting, and so on. So all I'm talking about is appropriate time, place, and manner. For example, when I was a young devotee, we used to do harinam all day. And what we do is go downtown, usually just station ourselves right in front of some poor guy's store downtown, and just chant and dance so that basically there's no question of like a customer actually entering the store. Because, you might get hit by a flying cartall or something, or, you just... So the store owners would get very disturbed because basically we were driving them to bankruptcy and how they're going to feed their children and so on. But of course, when they were upset, we knew the real story. They're demons. I remember years ago I was on a harinam in Waikiki, and the devotees, it was a very crowded tourist street. It was literally, and so the devotees just went right in the middle of the sidewalk and chanted. They were jumping and dancing. Didn't even notice. I noticed that the devotees were literally forcing pedestrians into the street, into oncoming traffic. Because you couldn't walk down the street. We were sort of like sidewalk hogs. And so, or for example, I hate to give these examples, but, when I went to Harvard, I found out that the Harinam party was like a laughing stock. It was like a gag. It was like a big joke in the Harvard department that studies Indian culture. These Western people come out dressed in their clothes and just sort of whirl around and leap and shout and everything and bang on drums. It was like a running gag. And then when I went to Harvard, because I was actually in my group of students, I was kind of like the best. I finished my PhD about twice as fast as anyone else. And I found that these same people who, when I got there, were sort of ridiculing the Hare Krishna movement, after a short time were inviting me to speak to them about the Hare Krishna movement. They actually wanted to know about it. And I had the whole department, all the professors, all the students, over to this big house I was staying in for prasadam and discussion. And they were literally inviting me to speak to them. Tell me about the Hare Krishna movement. Why? Because I fit in. So it's about getting the job done. It's about getting the job done. So, yeah, the instruments we use, the time, the place, the circumstances, everything should be done in a way that it works. Here's a philosophical point, which for some devotees are listening to be a rerun, but I think it's actually important. And that is that I think in this movement there's been a philosophical, how should I put it? I'll be kind. Imprecision. Imprecise, not being precise. And that is exaggerating the power of a-jnata-sukrti. A-jnata means unknown. Sukriti, literally good deed. Like, for example, someone hears a harinam party, they have no idea what it is, but they heard it. The sound went in their ear. Or they take prasadam. They don't know what it is, but they took prasadam. Now, is there a benefit? Yes, of course. It's spiritual. Is it enough to really make someone a devotee? In almost all cases, probably not. And the authority for my statement, my blasphemy, Krishna, the Bhagavad Gita. So it's like the Romans used to say, "Don't kill the messenger." If you look at the last verse of chapter 17:28, Krishna says, "Ashadhaya utam dattam tapastaptam," kind of tongue twister. Pratang chajat asarit yuchate partha nachatan natat natat sat jehanoiha. Those are all the right words, and they have paraphrased it. But what Krishna says is any religious activity, because in the Bhagavad Gita, there's basically three kinds of spiritual or religious activity, which are yajna, dana, tapa. Sacrifice, in which you offer up to God. Charity, in which you offer down to less fortunate people, and austerity where you give up, sense gratification. And so that's what you do. You offer to God, you offer up to God, down to less fortunate people, and you discipline yourself. And so in chapter 18, for example, when Krishna is kind of summarizing what he's taught, and he says that some people say that you should even give up sacrifice, charity, and austerity, give up everything. Other people say no, that these three even purify wise people. And then Krishna says, my final decision is you should never give them up. You always must perform sacrifice, austerity, and charity. And so it's those three again. That's in chapter 18, but Krishna, as a preface to that, he says, ashraddhaya, which means without faith, without really giving your heart to something, literally. Hutang, sacrifice. Datam, given in charity. Tapastaptam, performed as austerity, the same three. Anything which is done as sacrifice, austerity, or charity, without really knowing without believing in it. Krishna said, asat is said to be asat, unreal. Or, it has very little effect. That's Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Now, at the same time, we have this belief, frankly, probably the whole strategy of the Western Hare Krishna movement, but the main strategy is belief that people can be involuntarily saved. That if we just go out and do harinam, it's irrelevant whether they like it or not. It's irrelevant because we'll have the last laugh. We got the sound in your ear, dude. So, or if we just give them prasadam, and so on. I'm not saying there's no benefit. But what we are finding is that simply relying on a-jnata, unknown good deeds, sukriti, as the engine that will drive the Hare Krishna movement doesn't work. It just doesn't work because, actually, as Rupa Goswami says in the Upadeshamrita, if you think the results of bhakti are automatic, it's like bhakti mimamsa. It's like there's karma mimamsa, that's bhakti, in the sense that you think it's mechanical. You have to get the result. No. Rupa Goswami says that will destroy your bhakti if you think it's automatic or mechanical. So we have this huge strategy in the Hare Krishna movement based on a concept which Rupa Goswami says is actually dangerous and which Krishna says doesn't really work that well. I'm not saying that Prabhupada is wrong. Prabhupada said they just see the book or touch the book, if they just take prasadam. That's true. Of course there's benefit. But is there enough benefit to make this movement successful? All the evidence up till now is no. It won't make the movement successful. We give out millions and millions and millions of books and millions of places of prasadam, and the Western Hare Krishna movement among Western people is not setting the world on fire. To be kind about it. So, therefore, when you go out on harinam, it actually matters whether you do it right. It matters what the people think. If you have this attitude that the people don't, what they think and feel is irrelevant. I don't care what the public thinks. I don't care what the public feels. I don't care if the public is comfortable with me, because they will be involuntarily saved. Guess what? People cannot be involuntarily saved, because you're saved when you choose consciously to accept Krishna. And so if we started doing what every other group does or tries to do, and that is try to do it right. If we're going out in harinam, who are these people? What are their sensitivities? Do harinam in a way that works. Not just as entertainment, like, wow, look at this freaky thing. Yeah, let's stay and watch. Like some weird act on a walking street. It's I don't want that kind of attention. I never really was tempted to join the circus. And I don't want that kind of attention. You could go out on the street dressed as I don't know, South Pacific Islanders, or native Oaxacans, or Bavarian people with all their suspenders and mountain climbing shorts. You could be, Irish kilts and bagpipes. You can go out in the street with any kind of exotic presentation. You will get a crowd. They will appreciate it. They'll give donations. They'll take pictures. They'll thank you for it. And they will never in their life consider joining you. And so what we need to see is, what kind of attention are we getting? I want to go out in such a way that people can identify with me. They can think, well, he's a regular guy, and he's doing this, maybe I could do it. I want people to identify with us and to seriously consider, hey, maybe I could do this. Anyway, so as I say, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I guess time is up here. And unless someone had a really urgent question.
Some of the buddies are requesting, is it possible to write an email to you with further questions?
Yeah, I will send you by chat you have my email address.
Yeah, we have your email.
Yeah. This is like those cheap TV ads. Write today, but wait, right now, and we'll send you at no extra cost.
Thank you so much, Mars, for spending this time with us.
It's a pleasure. You guys are in the Chicago area, right?
Yes, Mars.
One of the most important cities in the world. So let's do it in Chicago. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol. So now we